Hello everybody and welcome back to our study in the book of Romans. This is our 29th of 30 studies, and today we're looking at Romans chapter 16 verses 1 to 16. Let me begin by reading Romans 16, 1 and 2. I commend to you Phoebe our sister, who is a servant of the church in Cenchrea, that you may receive her in the Lord in a manner worthy of the saints, and assist her in whatever business she has need of you. For indeed she has been a helper of many, and of myself also. This chapter is an amazing testimony of the relational person Paul was. His relationship with God was coupled with strong relationships with people, and can teach all of us some lessons in our present day, when often one's relationship with God can be seen to have no connection with people whatsoever. He begins with introducing a lady called Phoebe, who was perhaps bringing the letter from him to the Roman believers. He refers to her as sister, indicating that she was a Christian believer. He also refers to her as a servant of the church in Cenchrea. The word used here is diakonon, which is also used to refer to the word deacon. This also indicates that she was actively involved as a deacon in the church in Cenchrea. He asks two favors of the Roman believers, the first being to receive her in the Lord in a manner worthy of the saints, meaning that they welcome her just as they would welcome any other Christian believer. The next thing he asks of them is that they assist her in whatever business she has need of them. We are not aware what business she would have had for which she would have required assistance, but he asks them to help in whatever it was she was doing. He then mentions something more about Phoebe. He says that she had helped many people, including himself. Not only was Phoebe a deacon, but seemed to be a helpful person to many people as well. Romans 16, 3-5. Greet Priscilla and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus, who risked their own necks for my life, to whom not only I give thanks, but also all the churches of the Gentiles. Likewise greet the church that is in their house. Greet my beloved Epaenetus, who is the first fruits of Achaia to Christ. Paul then asks them to greet Priscilla and Aquila, whom he refers to as his fellow workers in Christ Jesus, meaning that they worked together in sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. They were also tent makers like he was. He mentions that they risked their lives for him, and for this both he and all the churches of the Gentiles give thanks. Their relationship must have been so intimate that they were willing to risk their lives on behalf of Paul. He also asks that they greet the church that met in their house. The early churches met in homes, much like is prevalent in some countries even today, and there's amazing growth happening as a result of these house churches. Paul then greets Epaenetus, whom he refers to as his beloved and as the first fruits of Achaia to Christ, meaning that this person was not only dear to Paul, but was also the first person who came to faith in Achaia, perhaps through Paul's preaching. Romans 16, 6 and 7. Greet Mary, who labored much for us. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my countrymen and my fellow prisoners, who are of note among the apostles, who also were in Christ before me. He then asks them to greet a lady called Mary, whom he says labored much for him and his companions in the gospel. He goes on to ask them to greet another couple named Andronicus and Junia, whom he refers to as his countrymen, meaning that they were Jews as well. He goes on to say that this couple were fellow prisoners, meaning they were imprisoned along with him at some point. He then says that they were of note to the apostles, which means they must have been of great service to the Lord, that the apostles took note of them. The final thing he says about them is something that not many a leader today would acknowledge, that they were in the Lord before he was. Isn't it amazing how much detail Paul gave concerning some of the people he asked them to greet? Romans 16, 8-11. Greet Amplias, my beloved in the Lord. Greet Urbanus, our fellow worker in Christ, and Stachys, my beloved. Greet Apollos, approved in Christ. Greet those who are of the household of Aristobulus. Greet Herodion, my countryman. Greet those who are of the household of Narcissus, who are in the Lord. He then begins to greet several other people, some about whom he does not give too much detail, but most of whom he says at least something about. He asks that they greet Amplias, whom he refers to as beloved in the Lord, and Apollos, whom he refers to as approved in Christ. Then he asks that the household of Aristobulus be greeted, followed by Herodion, whom he refers to as his countryman, who perhaps like Andronicus was a Hellenistic Jew. He then greets the household of Narcissus, whom he refers to as being in the Lord. Romans 16:12-16. Greet Tryphena and Tryphosa, who have labored in the Lord. Greet the beloved Persis, who labored much in the Lord. Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother and mine. Greet Asyncritus, Phlegon, Hermas, Patrobas, Hermes, and the brethren who are with them. Greet Philologus and Julia, Nereus and his sister, and Olympus, and all the saints who are with them. Greet one another with a holy kiss. The churches of Christ greet you. He goes on to ask them to greet two ladies called Tryphena and Tryphosa, who he says labored in the Lord. He then asks them to greet a lady named Persis, whom he refers to as laboring much in the Lord. He then says to greet Rufus, whom he refers to as being chosen in the Lord. Then to greet Rufus's mother, whom he also refers to as his own mother, perhaps because she had been of great help to him earlier. He then mentions a few more names without giving any detail about them, but asks that they greet the brethren along with these people: Asyncritus, Phlegon, Hermas, Parobas, and Hermes. He goes on to greet Philologus and Julia, Nereus and his sister, and Olympus, and includes all the saints with them. Let's remember that when he uses the word saints, he's referring to the believers in Jesus. He concludes by asking them to greet one another with a holy kiss, an expression of his holy affection for them. He then passes on greetings from the churches of Christ. If you are blessed by the study, kindly share it with others. God bless you and have a good day or night.